Hello, and welcome back to Educator.com's Introduction to PHP course. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about what are known as arrays. Specifically, we're going to be going over what actually an array is, the different types of arrays that are available in PHP. We're going to talk about what's known as the array construct, which is how you declare arrays within your PHP code, the square bracket syntax, which is how you access values in an array. We're going to talk about somewhat of an advanced topic called multidimensional arrays, and then as usual we're going to have a talk about coding conventions as they relate to arrays. So what is an array? Well, array is one of the 8 predefined data types in PHP, and it's known as a composite data type. And what that means is it's a data type that can hold multiple data values at the same time. This is opposed to scalar data types, and we've already learned about 3 of those: integer, float, and string. And an integer, a float, and a string data type can only refer to one piece of data. So an integer can refer to one number, float can refer to one floating point, a string can refer to one string. Array, on the other hand, can be used to hold multiple numbers or integers, multiple floats, and multiple strings. And actually, it can an array can hold any valid PHP type. It can hold as a data value. So you actually can have an array that contains both integers, floats, strings, and in fact, because an array is a valid PHP data type, it can actually hold an array as well, which will be known as a multi-dimensional array. And in PHP, arrays are treated as essentially maps. Because an array represents multiple pieces of data, you have to have a way to access those individual pieces of data. And so what it does is it creates a key, a set of keys, and it associates different values with each key. So like if you have an array with multiple numbers in it, let's say the temperature of the month, you need a way to access each of those temperatures, and the way you do that is using a key. In PHP, you can have 2 kinds of keys. They can be either integers or strings. And the values, as mentioned, can be any data type, as mentioned. Values can be repeated, but the keys must be unique. Because if you had a key 2 keys, how would you know which piece of data it refers to? So essentially, let's say we create an array here. We're going to call it, make this a little easier to read, call it ARR. So we're going to define a variable that's an array data type. And maybe we want it to hold 5 different numbers. So let's say it holds 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now the way that you access these different numbers, as mentioned, is through the use of a key. So we're going to associate a key with each of these different values. So for example, in what's known as a numerically indexed array, the number 0 is going to be used to refer to the first piece of data in the array, in this case the number 1. The number 1 will refer to the second piece, and so forth. The other option is that these keys could also be strings, and that's known as an associative array, which we're going to talk about now. So arrays with integer keys, as we just showed, are known as numerically indexed, or just simply indexed arrays. And arrays with string keys are known as associative arrays. So we have associative arrays and indexed arrays. So we had just looked at an example of an indexed array where you have, let's use some different numbers, where you have a key associated with them of 0, 1, and 2. And the reason I use 0 is that index arrays always begin with the index 0. So if you define a indexed array, the way you access the first element or piece of data that you've added to that array is using the key 0. And we're going to learn about the syntax in a second about how to do that. The other option would be that you could define an associative array. And let's say we have the same data values. Except that now we're going to use keys that are strings. Actually, let's make this 50. So now in order to access this first piece of data, 36, let's say these were temperatures during particular days of a week, we would access this using the key day 1. So the string day 1 refers to the piece of data 36. Day 2 refers to 72, and day 3 would refer to 50. And this is opposed to using the numbers 0, 1, and 2. And so associative arrays are quite useful because they're a little more intuitive in your code, and when you access elements, you sort of get to use a description as to what piece of data you're getting from the array. Here we know that we're getting, like, for example, the temperature of day 1. Up here, we use 0 to index the array to access a value in the array. 0 doesn't have as much meaning because every indexed array has a 0 in it. So one thing to also note is that in PHP, arrays can be a mixture of indexed arrays and associative arrays, meaning that they can have numeric indexes and string indexes all in the same array. It's a little more complicated. They're not used quite as often, and so we're not going to discuss them here, but in the quick notes, we've added a link to additional resources, an additional resources link that goes to the PHP manual webpage for arrays that's going to discuss a little more about using sort of this mixed type of array if you're interested in that. So how do we define an array? Well, in PHP, it's defined using what's known as the array construct, which is the word array and then a pair of parentheses. For index arrays, an array declaration is going to look like this. You have the variable name, you have the construct array with its 2 parentheses, and then you have a comma delimited list of values in the array. So here you have 95, the number 95, the floating point value 98.6, and the string hello. Now, because this is an index array, it uses integers as its keys. So this, because index arrays in PHP begin with the index of 0, this is going to be referenced with the key 1. 0. This is going to be referenced with the key 1, and this is going to be referenced with the key 2. Now, to define associative arrays, we use a similar syntax. We have the variable name, we have the array construct with the parentheses, and we have, again, a comma delimited list of values, but instead of just values, they're actually key value pairs. So we have the same data, 95, 98.6, and hello, or excuse me, the same values, and instead of using the default numeric keys that get associated with it, we're actually naming the key we want to associate with each piece of data. So for example, we're using the string grade to refer to 95. Maybe that represents a grade on a test. We're going to use the string temp to refer to the temp 98.6. And maybe we have a string that's going to be a greeting, and so we'd reference that with greeting. And it's important to note that the commas in these lists are very important because it lets PHP know when you've finished defining one key value pair in an array versus another. So we know what arrays are, we know how to define them now. How do you access information in an array? And well, the key is what's known as square bracket syntax. And it looks like this. So for example, let's say we want to access the second element of the array defined on the previous slide called index array. And it was actually, the value, if you remember, was 98.6. It was a temperature value. Because it's the second element in that array, its key is 1. And so the way we access the element is we have the variable of the array's name followed by a pair of square brackets with the integer not in quotes in between the brackets. And so what this is going to do, if we do echo this statement right here, it's going to output 98.6 because 98.6 is the value associated with the key number 1 in the indexed array. Now, associative arrays use a similar syntax. They have You access elements by giving the name of the variable, followed by a pair of open and closing square brackets, and then you include the string in the middle, which is the key for the piece of data that you want to access. Now the key here is that you need to enclose the string in single or double quotes. Up here we had the number and it wasn't enclosed in quotes because that way it lets PHP know that you're using a numerically indexed array. Down here, erase this so it's a little clearer, you need to enclose your key in quotation marks. So let's take a look at some of these concepts in action in real files. So we have a file here called indexedarrays.php, and it's going to demonstrate some of the concepts related to indexed arrays. And so what we've done is we created an array called dailytemp, and it's going to hold 7 values, and we're going to use it to represent the high temperature for the 7 days of any particular week. So we have the variable name, and then using the assignment operator we assign it an array of values, and we use the array construct, and then we have 7 different values, or 7 different integers in this case, which are going to be, the array is going to be comprised of, and if you'll notice they're all separated by commas. And then we have a couple of statements that output every single one of the values in the array, and that's to demonstrate the use of the square bracket syntax. So as if you remember, the first element in numerically indexed arrays in PHP is always 0. So to output the first element, 75, we would say dailytemp, square bracket, the integer 0, and then closing square bracket. And we do that so forth to access each of these individual elements in a row. Now if you notice, the 7th day, which is 65 degrees, actually has the index 6. So your last, because the array indexes begin with 0, the first element's always going to start with 0, and the last element is always going to have the number that's 1 less than the number of items in your array. And then down here we have a var dump comment, which we have used before to output the type and value of scalar pieces of scalar variables. It can also be used for array variables. So if we go ahead and look at this script in our browser, we can see that using the square bracket syntax, we were able to output each of the each individual day's temperature, and then also we see the output of the var dump function. And the way that works is if it's given in an array, if you pass an array to the var dump function, it lets you know that you have an array variable. 7 in parentheses tells you how many elements or how many pieces of data are in the array, and then it goes through and lists the key value pairs for the array. So since this is a numerically indexed array, all the keys are going to be numbers, so we have 0, 1, 2, 3, so forth. And then it shows the value after this equal sign greater than operator, and it says that the key 0, or the first element in this array, is an integer with the value of 75. And if you look here, we can see that they all correspond. So the second element, 76, with the index of 1, it says down here it's an integer with the value of 76. So now let's look also at associative arrays. Here we've created a similar array in a different file. It's a file called associativearrays.php, and we've named the array variable dailytemp again. And this time we're creating an associative array, and we have the same temperature values for each of the 7 days, except that now instead of numerically indexing the array and using integers as the key, we're assigning a string to each value. So I've made 7 keys, 1 for each day of the week: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and using this equal sign greater than operator, assigned it the temperature value. And notice the difference between the numeric array, or the indexed array, and the associative array. In the indexed array, you simply just list the values separated by commas, but in the associative array, you list key value pairs, and they make use of the equal sign greater than operator, which assigns the value to the right into the key on the left. So using square bracket syntax, we're going to output all of the different values in this array. So we have the variable name followed by an opening square bracket. Then in quotations we have the name, we have the key name of the temperature that we want to output. So in this case we want to output the temperature for Sunday, and which is going to be 75. And so we've done that for each of the different arrays, for each of the different days. And then again, we're going to have a var dump function that's going to output the associative array, and we're going to take a look at what var dump looks like for an associative array. So let's load the file up. And what you can see is it's output all of the temperature values of the array. So our square bracket syntax with the key enclosed in single quotes or double quotes worked. And then we have the output from var dump, which shows the array has 7 items, and then it goes on and lists the key value pairs. Now in this case, because it's an associative array, the keys are strings. So instead of Sunday being 0 and Monday being 1, it actually lists the name of the key that we assigned when we define the array. So Sunday is associated with an integer value at 75. Wednesday is associated with an integer valued at 73. So that's how you use square bracket syntax to access associative array data. And so we've demonstrated that for associative arrays as well as index arrays. The other thing that you can use the square bracket syntax for is not only accessing the data, but you can use it to set data as well. So for example, let's say we'll go back to the indexed arrays.php example. We've set up our daily temperature array with these 7 values. And let's say, oh, you know what, we made an error on Monday or the first day. The temperature wasn't actually 75, it was 78 degrees. So what we can do is we can use square bracket syntax to set or to update the value, that value in the array. And you use an assignment operator to do that. It's just like assigning an integer literal to an integer variable or a float literal to a float variable. And I think we said 78. So what the statement does is this is going to say, I want the value, the data value in the daily temp array that's associated with the key 0 to now be 78. So now this array actually contains the numbers 78, 76, 73, 73, 80, 70, 65. And the first one is replaced. So if we go back and we look at this, view this code again, we're going to see that the first value has been updated from 75 to 78. And as you can see, it has been done that. So use square bracket syntax is used to access and get the values in a particular way, and it can also be used to update the values in the particular array. So as mentioned, arrays in PHP can have, the keys can only be integers or strings, but their values can be any valid PHP data type. And an array is a valid PHP data type. So actually arrays can contain values that are in themselves arrays. And when you have that situation occur, it's known as a multi-dimensional array. So we have an example here. Let's say we want to create an array of addresses, an array that represents the addresses or the city and state of the address of our 2 friends, Joe and Jan. So what we do is we create our first array, and we have 2 keys. We have the key Joe and we have the key Jan. And then we assign them the value using the equal sign greater than operator. Instead of assigning them a scalar value like an integer or a float or a string, we're actually going to assign them a composite value or an array. And we're going to assign them an array that actually has that's an associative array that has 2 pieces of data in it. One is the city and one is the state in which that person lives. And we've named the key city and state to refer to these. So you can see that when we declare or we set Joe equal to an array, we use the same array construct with the opening and closing parentheses. And because we've now defined this key value pair for Joe, we have a comma. And the comma says, okay, now in this original array that we declared, we're going to be defining a new key value pair. We come down here, and we're defining a key Jan, and we're associating with it a data value that's also an array. It's an associative array with two elements, with the keys city and state, and they have the values, in this case, San Diego and California. So let's take a look at multi-dimensional arrays in an actual PHP file. Here I've sort of created the same array in multi-dimensional array in our PHP file. We have the addresses array, which is an array containing two key value pairs, or two elements. One has the key Joe, one has the key Jan, and each of these keys has the value associated with it, a value associated with it, which is an associative array containing a city and state element. And so the question then is, how do you access the elements in a multi-dimensional array? We know from square bracket syntax that to access the elements in a regular array, you simply use a square bracket with an integer or a string to access the particular value. Well, here we actually have two arrays. So if we want to access, for example, the city that Joe lives in, the way you do it is you use kind of a double square bracket syntax. And what you do is you have the array name and use the first square bracket to describe the first array that you want to, the first data value that you want to get. And in this case, we want to know, we want to load the data value, the array of Joe, city, and state. So what we do is we have the key Joe in parentheses in single quotes. And then, so what this does is this statement alone by itself says, okay, give me the value associated with Joe in the addresses array. And that's going to return this right here, this array. Then with this bracket, we're basically saying within this array that we're now working with, we want to access the city key and access the value associated with it. So what this is going to do is this is going to go into this array, which is two-dimensional because there's one array within another, and it's going to say look up the Joe array and then give me the name of the city in which Joe lives. And I've done that for both Joe and Jan. And I've shown down here we have a var dump again, and that can be used on multi-dimensional arrays as well. And I've included that so when we look at this file you can see how that output looks for a multi-dimensional array. And also I've introduced a new function that works just like var dump. You simply pass it the name of the variable that you want to output information about, and this one's called printr, and it's another function that is built into PHP that allows you to get some information or output about your different variables and is useful for debugging. So if we go and look at this script in our browser, we can see Joe lives in Norfolk, and if we look back here, we have a echo statement, Joe lives in, and then we're echoing the value of the city, that's associated with the city key in the array associated with the Joe key in the addresses array. So it gets kind of complicated. And we can see that it did the same thing for Jan. Now this is the output of the var dump, and we can see that because in our original array there's only two key value pairs. There's there's Joe and Jan, and they're each associated with their own array. It says the length of the array addresses is 2. Now when it goes in here, it lists the key Joe, and it lists the value of Joe. The value of associated with the key Joe is actually also an array of length 2, and the contents of that array are two key value pairs. One is a city that has a string of length 7 associated with it with the value Norfolk, and one is has a key called state with a string that's 2 characters long called VA, and it does the same thing for Jan as well. So that's what the output of var dump looks like. The print _r output is somewhat similar, except it doesn't give information about the types of the data. For example, here it says a string, and here it says it's an array, and it doesn't also give the lengths of the array or the lengths of the strings, stuff like that. It just says we have an array. It's got a key Joe, which is associated with another array that has these key value pairs. And then it has another key Jan, which is associated with another array with key value pairs. Now, this is known as a sort of a two-dimensional array, but you can even go as deep as you want in this. So, for example, let's say we wanted to have, instead of just Joe's city that he lives in right now, Norfolk, we want to be able to access the city he was born in as well. So what we could do here is, for the city value, let me move this down here. Instead of just associating it Norfolk, we can associate another array. This one is going to be a numerically indexed array. And the first one is going to be, the first value in the array is going to be where Joe currently lives, and the second value is going to be where Joe was born. Make it look a little neater here. So what we can see is we have an array that contains two keys and with them each has an array associated with them. And this first array, Joe, has two key value pairs. One is city, which has another array associated as its value, which contains two strings, and then it has a state for VA. And so the way that you access that information is similar to the square bracket syntax before, except you add another set of square brackets. So Joe is going to refer to this value in the addresses array. Then once we get that, city is going to refer to this array. And then within this array, let's say we want to access the place that he was born. Because it's an index array, and the second element we defined as the place he was born, it's going to have the index 1. We put 1 in here. And now what that's going to do is access this element in this array, which is in this array, which is in this array. And this could sort of go on forever and ever. So what happens is now we should see the output that says Joe lives in Richmond. So let's load that up in our browser. And we can see it's updated to show Joe living in Richmond. And var dump also has updated as well. And if you look through it carefully, you can see how it goes down three array levels deep. So coding conventions. We're going to revisit this topic over and over, and in this case we're going to talk about arrays. In this course, for arrays declared using the array construct, which is a typical way of declaring them, we're going to have them be formatted according to the Zend framework's coding conventions for arrays. Now the Zend framework is a PHP framework that's used to facilitate the building of PHP websites. It's a very commonly used framework, and if you stay in the PHP world, you might eventually become a developer using the Zend framework. But essentially what they've done is developed a coding conventions that all of their programmers that code for them need to follow. And we're going to follow those conventions for this course. And you can access the conventions at this address here, this website address. And I've actually loaded it up in the browser here. And this is the page it goes to. It goes to the Zend Framework Programmer's Reference Guide, and it talks about their coding style. And if you scroll down the page, they have a discussion on numerically indexed arrays and associative arrays and how you're supposed to format them as far as spacing and tabs and so forth go. And that's what we're going to use. That's the format we're going to use in this course. So for the homework challenge, we're going to have you mimic some of the things that we did in the course today, or in the lesson today. Basically, I'm going to have you create an indexed array and an associative array. The indexed array will be called items purchased, and it's simply going to be an array containing 5 item IDs. And this array could maybe represent 5 items that a user has purchased on your website. And we're going to have the IDs be strings instead of numbers. And then we're also going to declare an associative array called months. And in this case, all the keys of the array are going to be the strings 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 12. And with each numeric key, we're going to associate, using the equals greater than operator, the appropriate month. And then I just want you to go ahead and output, as we had done in the in-class example, each value of items purchased and months using individual echo statements, which will give you practice using the square bracket syntax. And be sure to remember that index arrays start with the index 0. And then you can also output them using var dump and to get practice at seeing what the output of var dump looks like for arrays. For the second homework challenge, it's a little more difficult, so I'm going to have you create a multi-dimensional array called monthly temps. And it's going to be an associative array, and the keys for the array are going to be the names of the months, so January, February, March, April, so forth. And with each month name, or each month with each key, you're going to associate an indexed array, or excuse me, an associative array that has two elements: an element with an index with a key called high, and an element with a key called low. And to each of those, you're going to assign an integer value that represents the high and low temperature for that particular month. So you're going to have the first array is going to be the keys will be months, and then with each of those keys, you associate another array that's an associative array that has the high and low temperature for the month. And then I want you to practice using the square bracket syntax, which again is going to involve double square brackets. And because they're both associative arrays, we use quotes around the indexes or keys for the array. And this is going to give you practice doing that, and just want you to go through and output individually each of the high and low temps for the different months. You don't have to do it for all of them, but just do it for a couple to get a feel, practice for using multi-dimensional arrays. And then be sure to try and use var dump and print_r, the new function we learned about, to output the structure and values in the array that you define. And that'll give you help in understanding one, the structure of the array, and also it'll help you understand the output that var dump and print_r generates. One thing to note is you need to be very careful with multi-dimensional arrays to appropriately close all of the array constructs with parentheses, and to make sure that you have commas in between each element of an array. And so in a multi-dimensional array, let's say we just have an index array with an array and an integer in it. So here we have a multi-dimensional array. I'm going to set it to some value over here. So we have the first array, and it has its opening and closing parentheses. And then within here, we've defined a second array as the first item in this indexed array, and it's going to be an array as well, just holding the one number, the integer 1. And if you'll notice, we have both the opening and closing parentheses for that, and that's very important. And the other thing that's important is that afterwards we have a comma. And the comma is what's going to delineate that this array is the first element in this array, and then the integer 29 is the second element in this array. So just be very careful with commas and parentheses when you work through these examples. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com, and we look forward to seeing you at the next lesson.